All right, welcome to the Pally Podcast. As always, I am Patrick, and once again with us today is Dr. Tom Cowan. You all know him. A lot of good feedback from our last episode, and we're excited to dive in today. Tom's going to be giving us a nice little breakdown of some of the fallacies within the cell biology, understanding what systems in our body are really there, other ones that are made up, basically, I think, in a nutshell. So, with that, we're going to hear this awesome breakdown by Dr. Tom Cowan. But how are you today?
I'm good. How are you, Pat?
Good. When I told everyone, and I was posting a couple of the things that you have done with your presentation in the past, and the onpouring of this is bullshit was hilarious. But when I sent people over your way, I had a couple of people reach out being like, where did you guys learn this? And some of them even going, I have to rethink my entire college courses and career now. And I'm like, well, it's not all for nothing. So you definitely spark some curiosity, but a lot of people are also very, very excited to hear this because they're happy to hear that they're not just a dwindling nothing and there's nothing they can do about it too. So
All right. Uh, let me just be clear on what you'd like me to do here. So, I do you want me to talk about the fallacies of cell biology, basically?
Yeah, so some of the things that you were bringing up that I thought were really your list that you had with that Patrick guy, I thought was a great list to share, and you were diving into some of it with Patrick, that other gentleman on the one radio show or something, and I thought it was a great conversation, and you were bringing up great points that I think are worth hearing and diving a little more into, being that you already had that presentation.
Oh,
So
got it.
is that cool with you? Is that familiar?
Yeah.
Okay. But is that the same one that you have right now?
Uh, I'm not sure. I think I know what you mean, and I think I can sort of wing it here.
Well,
So,
whatever the presentation you have to, I mean, for me and everyone listening, people are just excited to hear that there's this information out there in regards to the
yeah.
body and things like that. As a nutshell, that's the big thing. I was just talking about that was a great intro for people who maybe haven't heard this information. And
Got
it's
it.
not just so we don't have to necessarily go down exactly that path, but you have something set up today. Why don't we start there and we'll navigate through that? Is that cool?
Yep, that's
Awesome.
fine.
Awesome. Well, I'll let you if you would well, one, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm good.
Awesome. So take it
All
away.
right. This is a PowerPoint that I have to go back to the screen share. This is one of my favorite quotes from Mark Twain. It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. Uh, there's another one that I don't think I have here. No. It's from W.C. Fields, I believe. He said, if you can't uh, dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with bullshit. So uh, that's basically modern science in a nutshell. So there's a lot of places to start, but let me just start maybe a little bit philosophically, which is, and by the way, I have a number of people who I sort of got this from. So this isn't like something I just sort of made up off the top of my head. Uh, I would also say that if there's anything that I get wrong, it's me, not these people, because they were very meticulous. But the most important one is a guy named Harold Hillman, who was a British biologist and sort of neurobiologist. So he particularly studied nerves for maybe 50 years. And he was a little bit reviled by the other biologists and histologists and doctors and scientists because he questioned pretty much everything in biology. And the reason he did was not just because he was a curmudgeon like me sometimes, but because he insisted that things had to make sense, number one, which sort of is obvious. And number two, that the way you look at something has a huge impact on what you find. And I would say that that's going to be the theme of everything that I'm going to say in the next, hopefully, 15, 20 or so minutes here. That to separate out how you saw something from what you find is a huge mistake, which is a mistake that is endemic in modern biology and modern medicine. And because they've forgotten that simple rule, they've made so many mistakes that it boggles the mind. So that's sort of the basis. We're going to ask the question, how did you find this, before we, in trying to understand what it was found and what it does. And a big part of this question is trying to figure out what actually exists and what doesn't. And there, let me say a little bit of a background information. And I would say that if you want to say that something exists, like a tree, right? The question, which may seem stupid, but how do you know that trees exist? Now, I don't know even if most people have even thought about that. I have. And so here's my answer to that. First of all, you make a definition of a tree. In other words, a tree, I'm looking outside. It has a trunk, and it has branches, it has leaves, it has roots, although you can't really see the roots, and so on. Now, some definitions may be complicated, like it may have different kinds of branches or leaves, and they may look different colors and all that. But I think most people would end up saying, we know what a tree is, or we can sort of group them. And so we have a definition of a tree, even if it's kind of loose. And then we go to the ecosystem of the tree. In other words, like my lawn or my property or a forest. And we go and see if we can find a tree there or find an entity, an organism, a thing, like that meets the definition of that thing we defined. And so you can do that. Say, that's a definition of a tree. I look outside, I see it. And then you might want to ask other people, like, do you see that tree? And I would say it's certainly reassuring if 100 people agree they see the tree. Now, it's also interesting that it could be that there's like a blind person and they can't see the tree. Now, that doesn't mean if you ask them, do you see the tree? And they say no, you cannot therefore conclude the tree doesn't exist, because they just can't see it.
Right.
And there's 2 points about that. One is there may be another way to find out whether there's a tree. And 2, there may be also senses that some people have, but like I don't have. And so one does have to account for that. But I would also say that if you end up with an experience like a blind person says, I can smell the tree. And I know there's a tree because I can smell it. I think at that point, we have a responsibility to do what I would say is the next step, which is to, because it's an unusual way of knowing there's a tree, right? So we might want to like do an actual scientific experiment to see whether just because they say there's a tree that they're actually correct. So you might like put them in a place where there's no tree anywhere and see if they smell it. And they say yes, then you already have some doubts as to whether they're accurate. If they correlate 100% with and the only variable is whether there's a tree or not, and they keep getting it right, you can say, well, maybe I don't smell it, but this person has a better sense of smell than I do. And so you can use that. But now you're talking about a sort of surrogate test, right? That's not actually the gold standard, which is to see the tree like most of us do. It's a surrogate. And every surrogate has to be checked against the gold standard. So whether it's somebody who doesn't have a sense or whether somebody has clairvoyance and can see angels, somehow you have to check that too, because, most of us don't have that experience. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying at that point, you've got to do something called science. And science means you have to have a independent variable and a dependent variable, which is the dependent one is something that happens, and the independent variable is something you change. So in other words, I want to know if screwdrivers can screw in screws. So the dependent variable is the screw gets screwed in. The independent variable is the screwdriver. So I use a screwdriver and it screws it in. Then I do a control and I use a hammer and it doesn't work. And I use a nail clippers and it doesn't work. So I just changed one thing, and then I can find out whether it's true that screwdrivers screw in screws and only screwdrivers, maybe. And so that's sort of the background of this. So then if you just take that little short introduction of we're going to pay attention to how we know stuff and see whether the stuff we're finding actually makes sense. Does that seem clear?
Absolutely. And just the one takeaway too is you realize when you're actually doing and getting into the real science of things and doing science, it takes time. It's a process. There's a lot of questions, a lot of observation, and a lot of experimentation, which seems to not be the case in a lot of these situations. So already there's that light bulb going off. It's going, nope, we need something quick and answer. And you realize
Right.
as simple as asking what a tree is can be take a lot of time to really confirm scientifically, are we experiencing a tree? So um,
Yeah.
anyway, it
And
makes a lot of sense.
and not only that, but and this my friend Stefan Lanke has really hammered this point, and he's absolutely correct. It is the responsibility of a scientist, every scientist in every situation, to do everything they can to prove themselves wrong. They should welcome somebody who says, I have a different way of proving that you're wrong. Because if you don't do that, it ends up, well, you'll be wrong.
Right.
Because you didn't bother to try to figure out if you were really wrong or not. So we
Absolutely.
should welcome that. And unfortunately, we have a situation where if you point out, well, why don't you do this to see if you're wrong? Everybody sort of freaks out and starts attacking you and saying you're, a conspiracy theorist and all this. It is a conspiracy. The conspiracy is to not know,
Mm-hmm.
uh, not to try to find out.
That's
So again, with that introduction, we're going to ask the question, so what is a human being made of? And I would say, I ask a lot of people that, and they say a human being is light or love or energy or lots of things, cells, tissues, lots of different answers. I would say, in a way, they're all good answers, but they're not my answer,
mm-hmm.
uh, because I want to go into this being not only being sure, but telling people how I came to being sure. Both of those. So my answer is a human being has a head, ears, eyes, mouth, arms, legs, chest, feet, and a bunch of other things. Now, the question, of course, is how do I know that? And the answer is I looked at every human being I've ever seen, which is probably thousands and thousands, and everybody has those parts. Now, somebody may say, yeah, I know somebody doesn't have an arm and all that, but I mean, everybody knows what I mean. And
Yeah.
then I can ask you and my wife and my friends, did you see that head in that guy over there? Yep, I did. So we're on pretty safe ground. And the other thing that I tend to do is I go to other systems of knowledge like Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic and shamanic and anything I can find and ask, did they believe that people had, or do they think people had heads? As far as I can see, the answer is yes. And since I don't know anybody who disagrees with that, I think we can conclude that that's true. Now, and by the way we the method that we used to find that out was very simple. We just like looked. And in fact, if you're blind and you can't see, you could probably figure that out by touching the person.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would do it, actually do a test and see if they're right.
Mm-hmm.
So then I go, and this seems sort of silly and obvious, but I think it's the process that I'm talking about. So then I say, so what's underneath the head and the chest and the, that stuff? And my answer would be we have organs. We have blood vessels, we have nerves, we have a heart, we have a liver, we have a spleen, ovaries, all these other things, retina of your eye. And then somebody could say, how do you know those things exist? So you take a heart, for example. So I was an ER doctor and I saw people cut open and shot and et cetera, and I saw their heart. I also saw it on an X-ray. I saw it on a CT scan. I saw it on an MRI. And you can kind of feel it in there a little bit anyways. You don't really know that it's shaped like a heart, but you can feel something in there. Now, the question then is, how do I know that if you shoot somebody, somehow dying, if that's what happens, doesn't make a heart appear in their chest? Now, again, that may sound like a stupid question because it's extraordinarily unlikely for that to happen. But I would also say it's a good question because it may be that the dying process, we know that like with bacteria, if you kill them, they change forms into a spore, or fungus do that. And so things happen when things die. But in this case, I see it on an ultrasound. I can see it on a chest X-ray. I can see it on a CT scan. And I can see it on a surgery where the person's not dead, but just cut open. Now, could be that the anesthetic made their heart form or the cutting their chest. But again, I think that's pretty unlikely. So I think we're on pretty safe ground that these large organs actually exist. And then if you go again to Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic, etc., they all believe there's organs. And in fact, they put great stock in hearts and kidneys and livers and made a whole system of you're not doing well because the energy flow through your heart is weak or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and finally, I don't know anybody who doesn't think there's a heart. So I think we're pretty good, or a liver or a spleen or nerves or blood vessels. So I think we're pretty good with that. And now we want to go deeper. Although one could stop there and develop a whole system of science based on the flow of energy through the organs. And you don't need to know anything further. But in our, quote, Western science, we decided to go deeper and say, okay, what is a liver made of? And the answer is sort of obvious. The liver is made of liver cells. And then let me show you what we got here. So that is a cell. Now, again, so you take a liver, you want to know what it's made of, and you you theorize that it's made of these little compartments called hepatocytes, otherwise known as cells, liver cells. Now, I would ask you, have you ever seen a liver cell in an intact liver?
No.
No. No. Hey, you think anybody has?
No.
Right. I agree. I've seen people say that they're working on it, etc. But as far as taking somebody who's alive, maybe even anesthetized, and seeing liver cells in their intact liver, that has never happened, which
Exactly.
should make you certainly interested in the process.
Yep.
Now, it could be that we don't have an instrument to do that. So that doesn't prove anything. It doesn't prove there's no liver cells, but it certainly should make you interested, because the only way you can find out is to essentially remove that piece of the tissue from the liver. So now you've separated it from its living matrix, which is a big deal. That's a
Yep.
big deal, because it doesn't have its nourishment, it doesn't have its blood supply, it doesn't have its nerves. The whole energetic milieu and physical milieu is now different. But that's not it. You have to actually cut it into very small, thin pieces, and then you have to stain it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see these compartments called liver cells. Now, the question is, how do you know that that process of removing, staining, cutting it into little pieces, I mean, we're talking about very toxic dyes, that how do you know that didn't create these compartments called liver cells? And by the way, I'm not saying it did. I'm just saying, how do you know it didn't? Now, interestingly, here another fact is none of these Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, etc., ever said there were liver cells or any cells. In fact, nobody said there were cells until a guy named Rudolf Virchow, 1859, writes a book saying, because he saw onion cells, that all the tissues of a human being have cells. Now, that's what I would call a leap of faith. Because maybe onions are different than people. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
they certainly have certain differences.
Right.
Now, interestingly, we now think that there's 188 different tissue types in a human being: ovaries, lens of your eye, etc. 44 of them we know don't have any cells, like the lens of your eye. Because why would you put if you're going to look out, why would you put little boxes like cubicles in an office? It would make you have like lines in front of you. So that doesn't make any sense. So obviously it doesn't do that. It's just a pure homogeneous structure. And in fact, you really have to ask the question, why would a liver do that? Why wouldn't it be a better design to just have a homogeneous structure that had easy communication with just different things maybe floating or embedded in it? Why would you break it up into little compartments?
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, the only time you actually can kind of see cells in an intact human being is cancer cells on the, that come to the skin. And so that even brings up the question, is that a toxic sort of compartmentalization, or what I call cancer is garbage cans?
Mm-hmm.
So you have garbage, toxins, you might say, and you don't want them all over your body, so you put them in your breast, get it out of the way. And then you put them in little garbage cans, which we call cells. And so you didn't really have cells in the beginning. That was a collection device. So we're not made of cells, according to this. We just use that compartmentalization to do things like store poisons.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say there's questions whether cells exist, and a lot of people, I would say, don't buy it, particularly Hillman, although he said in these other 444, let's just say for a minute that there are cells. There are this compartmentalization that that happens. It's part of just how the tissue is formed. But I would say that we have to be careful about that. But from now on, we're going to go on as if that's the case. 44, there's no cells. Your bursa, there's no cells. Lens of your eye, there's no cells. But your liver probably has cells, or at least maybe. So then we get into this diagram. So what's in a cell? So we have all this stuff. We have a cell membrane. I don't have a cursor here, I don't think. But you can see it. Cell membrane, lysosome, Golgi vesicles, rough endoplasmic reticulum, centrioles, ribosomes, cytoplasm, microtubules, nucleus, etc. So we have this thin-walled structure that has a nucleus, and then it has a cytoplasm, which is the watery part around the nucleus. And there's a whole bunch of stuff dissolved in the cytoplasm. So the question is, are these actually real? You know, we have even the question, is the cell real? But let's say it is. So let's just take one example, this ribosome. Now, the ribosome is an extremely important structure in a cell. I don't remember the date it was discovered, but somewhere around the 1920s. And the reason it's important is a human being and all living things are made of proteins, right? It's like a tire is made of rubber. Living things are made of proteins, which then form the basis for organizing the water. And the ribosome is the place where the mRNA, everybody's heard of that now, is translated, in other words, made into protein. So the central dogma of genetics is we have DNA in the nucleus, right? That's the purple thing. And that gets made by a transcription process in the nucleus into mRNA. The mRNA gets out of the nucleus, goes to the cytoplasm, specifically goes to the ribosome, which are like protein factories. And the ribosome translates that mRNA into protein, and that becomes you, right? That's how it works. Now, the first thing that got my attention is the word ribosome. I don't know if you've heard this, but you know what ribosome means?
No.
So rib, right? R-I-B, rib, of, O, the soma. You know what the soma is?
Adam.
Soma means body.
Oh.
Like somatic.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So, in other words, they're telling you that the human being is made from the rib of the body. Of who? Like Adam. In other words, Eve was made from the rib of the body. So they're a little bit sort of mocking you.
Yeah.
That they know that this is funny already. But anyways, let's just say that was a mistake. So anyways, you're made from the rib of the body. And that has a whole lot of interesting connotations. But let's move on from that. So